The rain had been falling since before dusk, thin at first, almost polite, as if asking permission to stay. By nightfall it grew heavier, louder, beating against the cracked pavement and rusted railings of the roadside motel like a judgment that would not be delayed. Aisha stood beneath the flickering neon sign that buzzed weakly above her head. Vacancy, one letter half dead, the others glowing with tired insistence. She shifted the weight of her baby from one shoulder to the other, her arms aching, her back stiff with exhaustion. The cold crept through her thin coat, but she didn't notice. She hadn't noticed the cold all day. Her world had ended quietly, without thunder, without witnesses. Just a signature, a stamp, a door closing behind her. 24 hours ago, she had stood in a courthouse hallway holding these same papers, her hands trembling not from fear but from disbelief. She remembered thinking that divorce would feel louder, more dramatic, that there would be shouting or tears or a final argument that made sense of everything. Instead, there had been silence. The kind of silence that hollowed you out. Now that silence followed her into the night. She pushed open the glass door of the motel office. A bell rang overhead, sharp, intrusive. The clerk barely looked up. He slid a key across the counter, eyes dull with routine, and named a price so low it almost felt insulting. She paid without argument. It was all she could afford. Room 17. She walked back outside, rain soaking her hair, her shoes squelching with each step. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered like forgotten thoughts. The air smelled of wet asphalt, cigarette smoke, and something sour she couldn't identify. Room 17 was at the far end. Of course it was. The key stuck in the lock. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest, irrational, sharp. As if even this door might refuse her. But it opened with a tired click. The room greeted her with stale air and dim yellow light. The carpet was stained. The curtains were half torn, swaying slightly from a vent that rattled too loudly. A single bed sat in the center, its blanket thin and faded. This was it. This was where her life had narrowed to. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her forehead pressing into the cool wood. Her baby stirred, making a small sound, half sigh, half complaint. She pulled back immediately, guilt flaring hot and familiar. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mom is here." She crossed the room and placed him gently on the bed. The mattress sagged beneath his tiny weight, and for a terrifying second she imagined it swallowing him whole. She quickly laid her bag beside him, forming a barrier. The baby, her son, blinked up at her with wide, dark eyes. So trusting, so unaware of how fragile their situation had become. Aisha sat beside him, brushing her thumb across his cheek. "I'm sorry," she said again. She had said those words all day. To him, to herself, to the empty air of bus stations and sidewalks. Sorry for bringing him into a world where she could no longer promise safety. Sorry for believing words that hadn't lasted. Sorry for not being stronger. The baby yawned, his tiny fist curling around her finger. That almost undid her. She turned away quickly, standing up before the tears could spill. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now, not here. She needed to check the door. The windows. The lock. She tested the lock once. Then again. Only when she was sure did she let herself breathe. That was when she heard it. Footsteps. Muted, but close. From the other side of the wall. Aisha froze. Her heart began to race, thudding so loudly she was sure the baby could hear it. She held her breath, listening. The footsteps stopped. A chair scraped. Someone coughed. A man's cough. Low, rough. Next door. Her gaze flicked instinctively to the door. To the thinness of it. To the space beneath it where light from the hallway crept in. She hadn't thought about this part, not really. She had been too focused on surviving the day. On finding a place to sleep. On keeping her baby warm and fed. Now reality pressed in. She was alone. In a cheap motel. With a baby. Next to a stranger. She picked up her son and held him tightly against her chest, her arms forming a shield. Her body remembered things her mind tried to forget. Warnings, news stories, whispered advice. Be careful. Don't trust. Watch your surroundings. She moved slowly, quietly, turning off the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the dim glow from outside. She sat on the bed, back straight, muscles tense. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Her breathing slowed, just a little. The baby squirmed, then let out a soft whimper. "Shish," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Please, please sleep." But he didn't. The whimper grew louder, turning into a cry, sharp, insistent. The kind of cry that came from deep discomfort, from hunger or exhaustion or fear. Aisha's panic surged. She bounced him gently, walked the length of the room, sang a broken lullaby her mother used to sing, her voice trembling, words slipping away halfway through. The crying only grew stronger. Her hands shook as she checked her bag. The formula was nearly gone. She had stretched it all day, telling herself she'd find more tomorrow. Tomorrow felt impossibly far away. "Please," she whispered, tears finally spilling. "Just for tonight." The baby cried harder. And then, a knock. Sharp, sudden. Aisha gasped, clutching her son so tightly he protested. Her heart slammed against her ribs, wild and uncontrollable. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent. To disappear. Another knock followed, slower this time. Her mind raced. "Don't open it. Don't answer. Pretend you're not here." But the crying continued, loud enough to betray her presence. A voice spoke through the door. "Ma'am." Her breath caught. The voice wasn't aggressive. It wasn't slurred or threatening. It sounded careful. "I'm sorry," the voice continued. "I didn't mean to scare you." A pause. "I heard the baby crying. I just wanted to check if everything's okay." Aisha said nothing. Her entire body was trembling now, torn between fear and exhaustion. She backed away from the door, sitting on the bed, rocking the baby mechanically. Silence stretched between them. Then, softer, "I'll go if you want. I know how hard nights like this can be." That stopped her. "Know how hard nights like this can be." The words slipped past her defenses before she could stop them. She imagined the man next door, whoever he was, hearing her struggle through a wall thin enough to betray every sound. Hearing the baby cry, hearing her whisper broken apologies. Her grip loosened slightly. She swallowed, her throat dry. "I'm fine," she called weakly. Another pause. "All right," the voice replied. "If you need anything, I'm in 18. Footsteps retreated. The hallway fell quiet again. Aisha slid down onto the bed, her strength finally giving way. She pressed her face into her son's soft hair and cried silently, her tears soaking into him, mixing with the rain's distant rhythm. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She had imagined motherhood differently. Stability, a partner, a place that felt like home. Instead, she sat in a dark motel room at the end of a highway, holding her child together with sheer will. Eventually, the baby's cries softened. His breathing evened out, his tiny body relaxing against hers. Exhaustion claimed him first. Aisha stayed awake. She listened to the rain, to the occasional car passing by, to the faint sounds from the room. Next door, someone moving, someone alive. For the first time since the divorce, a thought surfaced that scared her more than anything else. What if this is my life now? She held her sleeping child closer, staring into the darkness. Outside, the neon sign flickered again. Vacancy. And in room 17, at the very end of hope, a woman waited for morning, unaware that this night, this place, and the stranger next door would change everything. Chapter 2. The Stranger Next Door. The knock had faded, but its echo lingered inside Aisha's chest long after the hallway fell silent. She sat on the edge of the bed, her baby finally asleep in her arms, his tiny breaths warm against her collarbone. Every muscle in her body ached, from the hours of walking, from the weight of fear she had carried since morning, from the effort of not breaking down completely. She didn't move. She listened. The rain outside softened into a steady whisper. Somewhere, a car engine growled and disappeared into the night. From the room next door came the faint sound of movement again, slow footsteps, the creak of a chair, a sigh that sounded too tired to be dangerous. Still, she stayed frozen. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her eyes drifted to the door, to the thin wall separating her life from a stranger's. She wondered what he looked like. Old, young, broken like her, or whole in a way she could no longer remember being. I know how hard nights like this can be. The words returned uninvited, unsettling her. They hadn't sounded rehearsed or curious. They had sounded familiar. Like someone speaking from memory rather than assumption. She shook her head gently, as if to clear the thought away. Sleep, she whispered to her baby. Just sleep. He did. Minutes stretched into an hour. Aisha stayed awake, staring into the dimness, counting each breath he took as if it were a promise she needed reassurance of. Her mind drifted despite her efforts, slipping backward into memories she had tried to bury. The argument that had ended everything. The silence afterward. The way her husband had avoided looking at their son as if guilt might burn him. I can't do this anymore, he had said. And just like that, she had been alone. Her baby stirred again, making a soft sound. She felt panic spike, but he settled almost immediately. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak. She laid him down carefully on the bed and covered him with her scarf, tucking the edges in like her mother used to do when winters were harsh and blankets were few. Only then did she realize how thirsty she was. Her bag held little: papers, a phone with a dying battery, a half-empty bottle of water. She took a small sip, saving the rest for later. Tomorrow was an uncertainty she didn't want to think about yet. She leaned back against the headboard and closed her eyes. She must have drifted off. Because the next thing she knew, she was waking to another sound. Not a knock. A baby's cry. Her baby. She jolted upright, heart racing. The cry was weaker this time, thin, strained. Her son's face was red, his tiny body tense. Hunger. She knew it instantly. Her hands moved automatically, reaching for the formula. The container was lighter than it should have been. No, she whispered. She shook it gently, listening. The sound confirmed her fear. There was barely enough left for one feeding, maybe not even that. Her throat tightened. She prepared what she could, measuring carefully, praying it would be enough to calm him. But as he drank, she could feel it, his dissatisfaction, the way his cry lingered even as he swallowed. When the bottle was empty, the crying resumed. Louder this time, desperate. Aisha pressed her forehead against his, tears spilling freely now. Please, she whispered, I don't have any more. Her body shook as she rocked him, pacing the room again. She tried everything, singing, swaying, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The crying didn't stop. Then came footsteps, close, right outside her door. Her breath caught. A pause. Then a soft knock. Aisha. Her name. Her blood ran cold. How? Her voice failed her. She swallowed hard. How do you know my name? I'm sorry, the voice replied quickly. I didn't mean to frighten you. The clerk, I asked if there was a mother next door. He mentioned your name. A pause. Then, gently, your baby sounds really hungry. She didn't answer. Her mind screamed at her to stay silent, but her baby's cries betrayed her again, breaking her resolve. I have something, the man said through the door. You don't have to open it. I can leave it outside. Aisha hesitated. Her arms were shaking now, fatigue and fear tangling together. She pressed her cheek to her baby's head, feeling his warmth, his need. What is it? She asked finally, her voice barely audible. Formula, he said, unopened, and a clean bottle. Silence filled the room again, heavy and uncertain. Aisha stared at the door, at the lock, at the thin barrier between survival and risk. Her baby cried louder. That decided it. Put it on the table, she said quickly. And step back. Of course. She heard him move, the scrape of something being placed down. Then footsteps retreating. I'll wait, he added. Down the hall. She counted to 10, then 20. Only then did she open the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. The hallway was empty. On the small table outside her room sat a plastic bag. Inside it, just as he had said, formula. A bottle, even a small packet of wipes. Her hands trembled as she pulled it inside and locked the door again. She sank onto the bed, clutching the bag to her chest like a lifeline. I don't know you, she whispered. But thank you. She prepared the bottle quickly, tears falling into the sink unnoticed. When she fed her baby, His cries softened almost instantly, melting into satisfied gulps. Relief crashed over her so powerfully she nearly collapsed. When he finished, he fell asleep in minutes, deep, peaceful. Aisha sat there, watching him, stunned by how close she had come to despair. A knock came again, but this time it startled her less. "Yes?" she asked cautiously. "I just wanted to make sure he's okay," the man said. "He is," she replied. "Thanks to you." A pause. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I didn't want to leave tonight without introducing myself properly." She hesitated, then answered softly. "Aisha." Another pause, one that felt different. Less tense. Almost human. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Daniel said quietly, as if confessing something fragile. "Car accident. Our daughter was only 6 months old." Aisha closed her eyes. "That's how I knew," he continued. "The cry, the panic, the way it sounds when you feel like you're failing someone who depends on you for everything." Her throat tightened. She leaned against the door, her strength slipping. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "Not tonight." They didn't say anything else for a while. Just stood on opposite sides of a door, sharing a silence that felt unexpectedly safe. "I'll be leaving early in the morning," Daniel added eventually. "But before I go, I'll leave some money under the door. Not charity, just help." Aisha shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "And someday, when you're standing and someone else is falling, you'll pass it on." Tears streamed down her face again, but this time, they didn't burn the same way. "Thank you," she said. "For seeing me." "Thank you," he replied, "for opening the door, even just a little." The footsteps faded once more. Aisha returned to the bed and lay beside her sleeping son. For the first time since the divorce, her chest didn't feel hollow. It still hurt. The fear was still there. But beneath it, something fragile and unfamiliar stirred. Hope. Morning would come with its own battles. Decisions. Uncertainty. But tonight, this strange, rain-soaked night in a cheap motel, had given her something she thought she'd lost forever. Proof that even at the end of everything, kindness could still find her. And sometimes, the night that breaks you, is also the night that begins to rebuild you.